Welcome to Messy Business, the podcast that helps solo business owners think better, not just know more. I'm Libby Langley, and each week I uncover the messy truth behind the internet's favourite business advice, assumptions and aspirations, helping you decide what's actually right for you and your business. Let's get started with this week's episode. What do you think about box ticking in your business? Do you do any box ticking? Or is everything that you do really, really useful, really strategic and really conscious? I'm going to ask you the question today about what you're doing in your business because you've actively decided it's worth doing, and what you're doing because at some point in the past you decided to do it and nobody, least of all you, has ever revisited the decision. That's what I mean when I'm talking about box ticking. Are you just doing for doing, or are you doing because you know why you're doing it? It's different to habits, really. This is about, am I doing this because it's useful, or am I doing it because it's on the list? And the reason I wanted to do this episode today is because I've been thinking about my podcast. This podcast, hello, welcome to Messy Business. We've done this is episode 205 now. It's a lot of episodes, that. And I've been evaluating it in line with, kind of changes that are happening in my business, the work that I'm doing, the clients that I've got, and whether, this is still a good idea for me to do. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere just yet. But this is... I thought it was a really good idea to kind of reflect on this and other things in business publicly, because you can't beat an overshare. And also it might help you to think about things in your business. But yeah, I'm not announcing the end of the podcast. Please don't think that. But it is part of an ongoing reflection on what I'm doing, why I'm doing stuff, what's working, what's not working, and all of that. Now, there's some things about keeping doing stuff that are kind of accepted as universal business truths, I guess. One of those things is that the big claim that consistency is what makes businesses successful. I think it's got a certain amount going for it. It's as an accepted business wisdom. We're constantly told that consistency beats motivation. Just keep showing up. Don't give up because something immediately isn't working. Marketing needs consistency. Algorithms reward consistency. Customers certainly need repeated exposure to you. And you just follow the process. You trust the system. Successful people, they do boring things repeatedly. And I do, a lot of that is true. I do believe a lot of that is true. And this podcast is certainly evidence of that, right? I haven't got to over 200 episodes because I've woken up really excited to record every one. Some have been, I don't know, sometimes I've been in the mood more than others, right? And I think that's okay to say that. Doesn't mean that I don't love doing the podcast, doesn't mean anything. It's just sometimes you feel a bit more like doing stuff, right? Because this takes a different energy than the energy that I normally carry about. I'm much better when I'm either like live in a situation, well, obviously I'm live now, but live responding to a situation with a client, or absolutely lost in my own head around what I'm doing. Okay, those are my two really natural modes. So this recording the podcast, it almost requires the client-facing level energy without anyone actually there responding to stuff. And I know that you're there nodding away and listening and smiling, but it's kind of like a passive response almost, because I don't know when you're listening to this. I don't know if you're listening to it on release day or in 2 years' time. Who knows? So it's a different energy. And to say that I wake up excited every day I'm going to record a podcast is not necessarily true, right? Whilst I do love doing it. There have inevitably been episodes, though, made because it was recording day and the podcast needed making. And I think that also is okay to say. because I've made a commitment to you, the listener, and therefore to myself, but ultimately to you first, to release an episode every Thursday. And I've done that for, I don't know, over 3.5 years, right? Over 205 episodes. And that's really important to me. And I think that is an inherent kind of evidence for the fact that businesses need systems. Because if every task depended on inspiration, most of us would accomplish bugger all. Let's not hide that fact. So box ticking in those terms isn't inherently bad, right? Because it gets stuff done. It's important because otherwise, I don't want to say anything like, if it doesn't light you up, stop doing it, because that's not true for every moment of every day, right? If overall it doesn't light you up and you don't like doing it, obviously don't do it, and if I hated this podcast, what would be the point? What would be the point in doing it, right? But I don't. But sometimes I'm more inspired to actually record than others, and that's not a lack of ideas either. I've got episodes planned for, like months in advance. So this box ticking thing, where do it come from, really? I mean, businesses are full of boxes to be ticked. They absolutely are. And I think there's a useful distinction here between systems and habits, right? As businesses and as business owners, as we kind of mature through our journey, decisions do gradually become processes. So at some point you decide, I'm going to release a podcast every Thursday. I'm going to send an email every Thursday. Or I'm going to go to that networking every Tuesday. You make the decision to do that thing, okay? But after enough times of that happening, after enough Thursdays of an email being sent, or enough Thursdays of a podcast going out, or enough Tuesdays if you go into a networking meeting, you're no longer deciding whether to do that thing anymore. It's just that day equates that task. So I know for me, without fail, podcast goes out on Thursday, email goes out on Thursday, Substack article goes out on Thursday, social media post go out Thursday, right? Thursday's quite a big day. Doesn't mean I do it on those days, right? I don't. I do it earlier in the week, but it has to happen. It's my commitment that it has to happen, right? And so it's really, really useful that, I think, for us to have that kind of process, those things that become process, because what it does is removes decision fatigue and it creates reliability, and it makes things that could be complicated much more manageable. So if you just know that once a week you're sending the email, you know what day it's going, you know what time you're going to schedule it for, you just know you've got to do it before that date and time. It doesn't half make it easier. And also, if you are ADHD or struggle to make decisions and to get things done, having that deadline, honestly, change your life, right? But committing to the regular thing is really good. So that's an important thing where decisions can become processes. And I think it's kind of the same logic behind things like checklists and standard operating procedures, recurring meetings, content calendars, even if you plan your social posts for a whole month and you do the same thing every Monday, same kind of post every Monday, same kind of post every Tuesday. Your CRM process that you have, monthly reportings, all those things, it takes all that decision fatigue away, because it's stuff that just needs to happen or that you've committed to doing on a certain date and time, right? It's possibly not business critical stuff, but it's stuff that is worth doing. Okay, when you're first doing it. I'm going to come back to that. And I do think as well that there's another layer to this, professionalism, business process, business progress, business growth, business delivery. It all requires doing things when you don't necessarily fancy doing them. Now, honestly, if I just did what I fancied, I would my garden would be amazing. Pretty much everything in the house would be listed on Vinted. I don't know. I'd walk about 50,000 steps a day, all of these things, right? I'd be cooking from morning till night. In fact, I couldn't do all the things that when I fancied them, right? I'd also have completed Netflix by now. So what we want is efficiency, and we want process, and we want stuff to work. You know, you don't necessarily want your accountant to say, I was really inspired by your VAT return this quarter. It's just about getting the stuff done, right? Sometimes. So some boxes absolutely need ticking. That's really important. And I guess there's 3 categories of box ticking. There's the kind of necessary boxes like tax returns, your accounts, invoices, compliance, any contractual obligations you've got with clients, that kind of stuff. There's the useful boxes, which will be things like your marketing, following up your leads, reviewing your finances, you know, seeing what's going on, maintaining relationships, like checking in with people, and looking at the overall business performance. Those things are really useful. And then there's the inherited and legacy boxes to tick, which will be things that you're doing primarily because you've always done them, or you agreed to do them once and now you're still doing them, right? These are the problematic boxes, which we will come back to. So why is there an appeal to this? You know, why does it kind of make us feel good to tick the boxes? I just think there's an absolute ton here psychologically, right? Completion feels really productive. So, you know, a completed task, it gives us something tangible, ticking off the list, to-do list is to done. You know, it's just a great feeling. Like record a podcast, done it, tick. I don't need to think about that anymore. It doesn't need to have headspace anymore. Write a newsletter, write an email, tick, I've done it. Don't need to think about that until the next time. Post on LinkedIn, done it. Don't need to think about it anymore until the next time. There's a real motivation in that, in like working through the list of stuff. It's much easier to have those tangible things than saying something like, you know, on my list is to make sure my business remains commercially healthy. I mean, how on earth do you tick that off, right? You need these proper tangible things that you can say you've done that. So what we do is we substitute activities that we can measure for outcomes that are harder to measure, right? So, you know, business remaining commercially healthy is quite hard to measure, but doing the things that get you there are easier to measure, right? You can tick the boxes, and it removes the decisions. And I think it's universally applicable to all of our businesses, right? Whatever your business is and whatever your business does, it needs these things and has these things behind it. So if the rule, like my self-created rule of podcast every Thursday, I don't have to wake up every week and ask whether making a podcast is a good idea, right? There is a podcast, it needs episodes, I record them. That I don't have to think about that, but I don't have to make the decision on that. And what effectively that does is it outsources the decision to past you. You've made the decision. Therefore, you don't need to decide about it anymore. It doesn't take up any headspace, right, at all. And I think that is really efficient and really effective until the decision that past you made no longer fits with present you's business, right? This is about reviewing the things that you're doing and the things that you decided and seeing whether you are doing them because they need to be done and it's useful, or because it's on the list, right? The why. Yeah, okay, but why? Why are you doing that? And having had a past in the public sector, I can tell you, it's not a question that's asked often enough, certainly. And I think the bigger your business, the more of that fat, the more of those, why is this? Decisions that really need to be asked. And, you know, those are the kind of questions that I ask of my clients, actually. It's just, when I do business sort outs, when I do consultancy with clients is, yeah, but why? And often people can't answer that at all. And if why are you doing that? Because it doesn't match with the direction you said you wanted to go in. It just makes people stop and think, which is really important. It's kind of what my job as a consultant, as a business sorter outer. That's what my job is, to do that. So I think that consistency does become part of our identity. Part of my identity is certainly, I've published 205 podcast episodes. I've had a podcast for coming up for 4 years. Let's say it like that. I email my list every week. Been doing that for, consistently, I guess, over 5 years this time round. Probably nearly 10 years this time round. I can't remember. But overall, 15 years with a few periods of not doing it. Or you go to the same networking group every Friday since 2019. There's this kind of consistency that does become part of our identity, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? But stopping doing it, it doesn't necessarily just feel like changing a marketing tactic. It can feel like breaking a streak. It can feel like changing something about who you are, and it can feel like letting people down. It really can do that. Deciding, I co-hosted a networking group for 4 years, and before COVID and then during COVID. And I really liked it. It was a fortnightly breakfast networking thing. So we started off in person, then we went online. And deciding to stop doing that, honestly, it's one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. And it's really silly because, I got work from it. I made a lot of friends through it. It was very, very important to me. But to stop going is, you feel like you're letting everybody down, and you feel like, oh, I'm not part of that anymore. Who am I now? And I think we all have things like that. So making something tailing off, like if you just, if you email reasonably regularly, but it's a bit sort of sporadic and you don't have that like regular commitment and you don't do it for a while, then you don't necessarily notice the same, but you've made the commitment. Like I make the commitment every Thursday, my emails go out. If you want to get my emails, it's libbylangley.com/email. Then if I don't do it, I've not only let myself down, I've let you down, I've let everybody down. Do you know what I mean? It puts a completely different emphasis on it. And I do think it's part of your identity to a certain extent. And certainly the longer you've done something, the harder it becomes to question it, right? You don't very often question why. You might look at your open rates on emails and this, that, and the other, but actually, how often do you really track, or can you even really track whether it does anything or not? It's sometimes it's quite a difficult question to ask at that, and you have to rely a bit on gut feel with things sometimes, which is fine. It's okay to do that. You can get all the stats in the world, but they're not necessarily the right stats for what you need to measure it for, because it might just be about reminding people that you're there. It might just be about a bit of visibility. It might just be for one really juicy client every 2 years. That might be enough for you. And in which case your stats, different stats matter, right? So this is all about kind of reflecting on things that you've done. And certainly the longer you've done something, the harder it becomes to question it, And I think that reassures us doing the regular stuff that we're doing business properly. Certainly relevant around marketing, right? You've done a podcast. If you've got podcasts, you sent out an email, you've done a LinkedIn post, you've been to a networking meeting, you put something on Instagram. Oh, you did a reel as well. Well done, you. You've done follow-ups, you've done whatever you can, and then you can think, good, marketing done, tick, box ticked. But does any of it actually do anything or achieve anything other than ticking the box? And that's the thing to question. Measuring activity is much easier than measuring usefulness. So the kind of truth of this all really is that I think discipline and mindless repetition can look identical. And we don't want them to be that. For example, from the outside, if there's person A, they publish every week because they've evaluated it, it serves a purpose, and they've consciously decided it's worth the resources, versus person B, who publishes something every week because they've published every week for 3 years. They perform exactly the same action, right? But one is strategic consistency, and the other, quite possibly, is just box ticking. I've done that. Great. No evaluation, no strategic thinking, no. Why are you doing it? What does it achieve? A really good example of this, it's not as regular, but creating new lead magnets. So maybe you say, every quarter you're going to create a new lead magnet for people to sign up for. And it's like, yeah, but why? What was wrong with the old one? What do you actually, what actual result do you want to see other than just get people on your list? What for? And it's asking those kind of what 4 questions, why, that get you to the result of what you want, and also stop you wasting time by doing stuff that you're doing, if you're really honest with yourself, just because it ticks the box that you've done it. And maybe you listened to a previous podcast that I put out about, how important email marketing is or social media is or something. I haven't been that positive about social media for quite a long time now, but it still exists, and it's still a really good format and a really good way of reaching people. But it doesn't mean you need to post every day. I mean, I honestly think those days are gone. I really just think that regularity, they just don't work like that anymore. So save yourself the bother and post twice a week, once a week, 3 times a week, whatever instead. It'll probably do you more good. So the thing to think about is whether the activity, right, is still alive and is still relevant. So when did you last decide to do the things that you routinely do? I would love for you to answer that question, because I bet you can't remember on some of them. So bringing it back to this podcast, back to messy business, people tell me they listen. Thank you. I love it when you say that to me. It's really nice. There's more than 200 episodes that are creating a really substantial body of work. In terms of positioning me, it demonstrates my thinking. I can point people towards specific episodes. I like being a podcaster. I like having that as part of my identity, and it's budgeted for and all that stuff. But sometimes it's frustrating because I don't necessarily feel like recording it when I've scheduled the time to record it in my diary, although generally I do. Once I start talking, I feel fine. Sometimes I get a bit fed up with talking about the same thing, which I know it's not the same thing, but to me it's the same thing. And it's all very, very useful and different angles about business. And I know you will get a nugget from each one. Even if I recorded the same episode on the same topic, exact same topic every week, I would phrase it slightly differently. So I know there's difference, but there's a difference between how people receive stuff and how you feel about it yourself sometimes. And, it generates work for me, of course, which is great. That's just the main point of it, really. But it also creates more work for me because there's the podcast episode recording of, there's the associated emails and marketing and all that stuff. And so it is something to look at, because I like doing paid work, getting paid, and then getting on with my life, So the question I'm kind of asking myself is, does the podcast just tick a box? Am I still doing it because I've been doing it for this long and it would break my streak? Like, I'm on day 735 of doing my steps every day. And I can't tell you how gutted I was to forget about Wordle. I forgot after 235 days of doing that. And I one day just forgot to do it. It doesn't make any sense. So things don't necessarily become habit, right? But, that's something to think about, and something I'm continuing to reflect on. Is this podcast just ticking a box, or is it still part of my strategic offering? And I think it's the latter, right? But I think it's a good question for me to ask of myself, and certainly for you to ask of you. And I think a question to ask yourself as well is, if I wasn't already doing this, would I choose to start it today? So if you are posting every day on social media because you've always done it, or you've done it for a long time, would you choose to do that today? Quite possibly not, is the answer. And if I didn't already have a podcast, would I choose to start one? I think the answer for me is yes, because in 2013, I said I was going to have one, and I finally did it in 2023, or whatever it was, 22. So, it only took me nearly 10 minutes to do it. So it's quite interesting as a diagnostic question to ask yourself, would I start doing this now if I wasn't already doing it? And I'd really love you to reflect on that. And I think also it's important to say, there is another messy truth about this, really. Sometimes you just need to tick the bloody box, rather than doing, I'm only going to do what I enjoy ever and just float through everything. I can't be bothered today, but it's really useful. is a reason to do it, right? You don't have to always feel like super pumped about doing the thing if you know that it brings the results. You can you can be super enthusiastic about it 75% of the time, and that's okay, right? There's always going to be times, even with like our favorite client or our favorite event or something, that you just think, I don't feel like it. And that's okay too. Acknowledging that, I think, is okay too. It's got to fit, right? It's got to make it worthwhile. And so audit your boxes that you tick, right? Ask yourself, why did I start doing that? Why did I start doing this? Whatever it is. Does that reason still exist? What does this give my business now? What does this cost me in time, money, energy, headspace? What would actually happen if I stopped? And I think if you know in your heart of hearts that something isn't right, that decision to stop doing it is like the toughest one. But most of the time you can stop doing stuff and nobody notices. I mean, I'm damn sure nobody would notice if I missed a week of this, because you've got 205 other ones you can go back and listen to. Would it matter? I don't know. I'm not going to try it and see. But interesting. So you don't have to keep doing something just because you've always been doing it. And I don't know for sure whether Messy Business has become a box ticking exercise. I don't think it has, because I do still enjoy it and it does still bring me a return. But I don't know. It's something I need to continue and continue to do. I think my answer is that no, it's not. But it's been really interesting to explore this with you and to share the questions that I ask myself sometimes. And just, it's important for us all to look inside the box we're ticking sometimes and check that the thing is still worth having in there. I think that's really, really important. So I hope that you're able to reflect on your own business, having listened to this episode, and see which box in your own business you've been just faithfully ticking for months and years without really stopping yourself to ask why it's still on the list. And I hope that you're able to take a few things off the list and make some tough decisions as a result of this too. And think of all the things that you can do with all the time and energy and possibly money that you save. So let's not do no thought box ticking. Let's do constructive, strategic, making progress ticking. That's much better. All right. Thanks for joining me today on another episode of Messy Business. I will see you next week for another episode. All right. Lots of love. Bye. Bye. If this episode of Messy Business made you think differently, why not share it with someone who might need to hear it too? And if you're enjoying the show, make sure you're following wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss future episodes. Until next time, remember, change how you work, not who you are.